Good afternoon. My name is Pam McGinty. I'm the program manager for the Student Idea Board and Disability Initiatives. I'm a white woman with curly dark brown hair wearing a blue flowered shirt. My background is blue with the U of M logo. I would like to personally welcome you to this year's conference towards an anti-ableist academy advancing inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility at U of M. Throughout the month of October, this conference includes 11 online sessions, each between 60 and 90 minutes, as part of Disability Community Month activities. There are 11 sessions in total, which focus on the progress made and work still to be done on recommendations to close accessibility gaps across campus for disabled students, faculty, and staff at the University of Michigan. I was a part of the IDEA board, serving on the pedagogy, career development, and disability cultural, community, and climate subgroups. I was also a member of various implementation groups as well. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's session titled Behind Compliance, Graduate Students with Disabilities Needs Assessment and Promoting a More Accessible and Inclusive Campus Culture, presented by Rackham, Assistant Dean and DEI Implementation Lead for Rackham School of Graduate Students. Rackham, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Pam, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Ethan Brammer, as Pam has already mentioned. I use he, him pronouns. I am a cisgender Indigenous man with brown skin, dark black hair that's pulled back into a braid. I wear brown glasses, and I'm wearing a gray sports coat with a block and lapel pin, a black sweater and white dress shirt with a maize and blue background and a University of Michigan logo. I, as Pam said, serve as one of the assistant deans for the Rackham Graduate School here at the University of Michigan, and I am also the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Implementation Lead. I would like to give an opportunity for all of my co-presenters to be able to introduce themselves as well, beginning with Christina Klein.
Good afternoon. My name is Christina Klein. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman with brown hair pulled into a braid. I am wearing a black top, and I'm in my very light colored office. So my role at the university is I am the ADA coordinator for the institution. And essentially that role is to provide guidance and assistance and resources with regard to our responsibilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act and similar laws. And as we'll talk about today, is also helping explore opportunities to go beyond compliance whenever possible. I was also participated on the IDEA board back in 2019 and have been assisting in efforts for implementation of those recommendations as well. And I have been working with Ethereum and the other panelists who we'll introduce in just a moment, talking around this needs assessment and other efforts. So with that, I would like to send it over to Darlene Ray Johnson.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Darlene Ray Johnson. I am a cisgendered African-American woman with short black hair, a maroon color sweater, a dark blue University of Michigan background, and silver jewelry. I serve as director of graduate student and program consultation services. I also serve as Rackham's resolution officer. And within that role, I also serve as the chief administrator for employment accommodations for graduate students. I use she, her pronouns. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Arthur.
Thank you, Darlene. Good afternoon. My name is Arthur Verhoogt, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm one of the associate deans in the Rackham Graduate School, and I teach in the Department of Classical Studies. I'm a middle-aged, white, cisgender male with dark blue glasses and some remains of blonde hair. Today, I wear a white shirt, a red knitted sweater vest, and a dark blue blazer. My background is maize with a blue Michigan logo. The next person to introduce herself is Beth.
Hello, everyone. My name is Beth Duttridge-Corp. I use she, her pronouns. I am a cisgender white woman with medium length brown hair, green eyes. I'm wearing a light gray blazer, a pink patterned blouse, a beaded necklace, and have on pink eyeglasses. I'm joining you from my home office, but my Zoom background is blue with the logo. I am the Graduate Education Program Manager for the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. In my role, I assist the deans with implementation and administration of policies and procedures, and I also help with various initiatives that improve the experiences of graduate students in LSA graduate programs. And it's wonderful to be with you all here today. And I will now turn it over to my colleague Ephraim to get our presentation started.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you all again for joining us. At this point, I would like to share my screen so that you all will be able to see our PowerPoint presentation, which was also dropped in the chat. This entire project collaboration started with a needs assessment. We felt that it was really important for us to connect with our students directly to better understand the needs of graduate students with disabilities. Our understanding is that this is a first of the nation study that often students with disability in higher ed studies are often focused on undergraduate populations and very rarely focused exclusively on graduate students. And so we're very proud to be able to have done this work in collaboration with our students, as well as the researchers, including researchers at Advance, like Janet Malley and Abigail Stewart. We also are thankful to our faculty colleagues like Remy Yurgo and our graduate and postdoctoral students, Nitya Chandran and Dwight Kelly, for supporting our work. In winter of 2020, all Rackham graduate students, over 9,000 of them, were surveyed. A total of 1,070 responded, of whom 349 identified as having a disability, and 147 more felt like they would benefit from accommodations. The respondents were well distributed across Rackham's 4 different disciplinary areas of the biological and medical sciences, physical sciences and engineering, and the social sciences and arts and humanities. In short, the findings revealed that we have a lot of work to do in terms of accommodating our graduate students. Our graduate students have difficulty obtaining accommodations. When they are successful at obtaining accommodations, they have difficulty implementing those accommodations. And these attempts at obtaining and implementing accommodations are taking place within a backdrop of a less than welcoming climate and culture on our campus around disabilities, especially for our graduate students. One thing that makes, I think, our study unique and the outcomes of the findings unique is that we learned the importance to differentiate our graduate students' roles compared to maybe undergraduate student counterparts. Our graduate students are often funded through their employment through the university. And so our doctoral students, for example, and our master's students as well, will often serve as graduate student instructors, graduate student research assistants, and graduate student staff assistants on our campus. And so the accommodations process looks very different for students compared to employees. And our graduate students have to navigate both of these structures. And it's not always seamless, and it's not always perfectly integrated. And so this is one of the most important findings. If you'd like to see the entire report, I'm going to drop the link into the chat so that you can access it on your own time. And with this, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Christina Klein.
Thank you. So in thinking about this information, the information that was gathered from this survey, and sort of figuring out how do we respond to it, what kind of information and should we be sharing with others in order to address the concerns and the experiences that were raised in the survey. So part of the discussion and in this group around how to, again, like I said, respond to the information shared by the students who responded to that survey was about, what's our responsibilities here, but what else can we do beyond that? So specifically, the verbiage that we use here to describe kind of our thinking around this effort is compliant or beyond compliance. And, I have here on this slide essentially a summary of what the law requires, what the Americans with Disabilities Amendment Act requires. It is a civil rights law. It is there to safeguard the rights of individuals with disabilities by ensuring that entities like the University of Michigan comply with 3 requirements. First is a prohibition against disability-based discrimination, a prohibition against disability-based harassment, as well as a duty, an affirmative duty to provide reasonable accommodations for qualified individuals with disabilities. So that's the law, that's what's legally required. But as many folks may know, you can still comply with the law, but there may be still significant gaps in terms of accessibility, in terms of inclusion. So there's things that we can do beyond this. So when I give guidance, for example, around what is legally required, I'm essentially describing the floor. We needed to make sure as we're educating folks who work with graduate students, this is our here are where our legal responsibilities are. This is where you need to be no matter what. But more importantly, though, that's not the end of the conversation. That's not the end of our work as an institution. We need to be thinking beyond that. What can we do in addition to meeting our legal responsibilities to ensure that folks feel included, to ensure that they feel not only that we are making efforts to support them as students and as employees, but also that we're hearing them, that they are contributing to this environment. So in thinking about beyond compliance, that first bullet point says, whenever possible, we should explore what we can do beyond what can be done beyond compliance. And encapsulated in this are the 2 following questions around what can you do in your program to make your program more inclusive and more accessible for all students? I would also add, and all employees as well, given as we've already acknowledged, graduate students oftentimes do have dual roles at the institution. And what can you do to make your program, to make the accommodations process more seamless for graduate students who are also employees? So there's these things that we build into the program themselves so that folks maybe don't have to ask for accommodations, but then when folks do ask for accommodations, what can we do around that process to ensure that folks have that access to it, that they feel that they can navigate that, or more importantly, that they feel that there are those resources there for their support? So in looking at the efforts that we're going to be hearing about more from today, these efforts, as Ethram already mentioned, came from this Rackham graduate student survey. It's intended to share information about some suggested practices to increase inclusion and accessibility. But I also want to note too, that part of that idea board effort, one of the recommendations specifically talked about educating folks or getting additional information to faculty, to staff, to students and graduate students, so that folks know more about these types of questions that graduate students might have, so that graduate students know how to navigate the academic and employment accommodation process, and also that there's efforts as well toward more inclusion and accessibility just beyond those legal compliance responsibilities. So from there, I will then turn it over to Darlene.
Thank you, Christina. Barriers to persons with disabilities are substantially different in graduate and professional school from those facing undergraduates. Graduate and professional students study in a much more competitive environment, and accommodation needs for independent study associated with graduate education may be much more extensive. Currently, graduate students are accommodated under the general rubric of undergraduate-focused accommodation policies. And this just does not work well. The requests are increasing, and requests for accommodation are becoming much more complex on the graduate side. A principal finding of the report is that there is a difference, as Ephraim had mentioned, in the experiences of graduate students that are not always recognized within the current accommodation structure. These differences are exacerbated due to graduate students' dual role on campus as both students and employees, and the degree to which they switch back and forth between these roles over the tenure of their time as a graduate student. Also, students receive, as Ephraim indicated, they have appointments as GSRAs, GSIs, etc., but they receive their academic funding through these positions. So again, you see this overlap in the academic and the employment side. Also, graduate student office space may double as academic and employment workspace. This is further complicated by the fact that the graduate student experience require accommodations that extend beyond the classroom. We have students in lab settings, seminars, field work, practicum placements, conferences. Also, issues related to the completion of academic milestones, our prelims and qualifying exams. Major research papers that involve the completion of independent research and major writing components. Graduate students report a high cost for their self-advocacy with the accommodation process. It's emotionally taxing, anxiety-provoking, time-consuming. It garners fear of lost opportunities by exposing their disability, things like funding and key assignments and/or employment opportunities. The Committee on Graduate Student Experiences with Disability Accommodations believes a coordinated campus-wide effort is required to address the needs of graduate students with disabilities. Currently, academic accommodations are handled through the Services for Students with Disabilities Office, which has recently implemented a new Accommodate system. It's a case management system that will assist students, faculty, instructors, and staff in requesting, approving, and implementing disability-related accommodations. You'll probably hear about that more in a subsequent setting, or you can go to the SSD website for information about this process. I'm here to focus on the employment-related accommodations, and those are governed by Article 22 of the GEO contract. I've highlighted several key provisions of the contract here in this slide. The contract identifies a designated central office, which is located in Rackham Graduate School. And as I mentioned earlier, I serve as the principal administrator of that process. Accommodation requests may be made at any point during or preceding the term of employment. Informal requests do not require completion of a request form and may be made directly to the employee's immediate faculty supervisor, appointing unit faculty, or staff with responsibility for the employee's appointment. There is no requirement to disclose the medical condition or impairment to a hiring supervisor. That information is only shared with the central office, with me in my role. The formal accommodation process requests are completed using an accommodation request form, which is located on Rackham's website. And there's a provision of a central accommodation fund to supplement unit accommodation expenses. Those funds are not directed towards students. It provides for an appointed administrative designee for each employing school or college to coordinate the accommodation request and implementation process. And there's an interactive process that we engage in for determining reasonable accommodations as warranted. Not every disability requires an interactive process to determine an accommodation. In closing, moving beyond compliance means consciously developing strategies to accommodate all graduate students equally and generously with attention to the dignity of each individual. Success of the accommodation process is greatly enhanced by shifts in program cultural norms to create changes in the classroom and employment culture. However, it remains clear that there's a need to improve the accommodation process, as well as expand the breadth of accommodation offerings for graduate students. And with that, I'll pass the mic to Arthur.
Thank you, Darlene. These were powerful words. Thank you all for your presence and interest in this important topic. Thanks also to my colleagues in this working group. As Dr. O said when he kicked off this virtual conference on October 4th, we are all single individuals involved in a small part of this work. But when we all work together, as we did in our working group, we may slowly move the University of Michigan into an institution where students, staff, and faculty with disability are welcomed and included without having to ask for it, This would be such a change from the more traditional, ableist, and harmful academic mindset that frequently asks what a person with disabilities is doing here at this university. I, for one, would like to see an institution where people with privilege and power, before even talking about accommodations, before talking about how to create the circumstances for a person with disabilities to be wholly included, that people with privilege and power would begin with 4 simple words. You are welcome here. You are welcome here. How can I be supportive of you and your work? I want to learn from you, from where you are and how you are, as was put up in one of the earlier presentations this week. Would that not be a great first step towards an anti-ableist academy? As we are considering how to create more accessible graduate programs, graduate education, to go beyond compliance, as Christina just said, we also need to address the intersections between disability and mental health. In this work, we could reach out first to Rackham's task force on graduate student mental health that was active between 2019 and 2021. So there was a nice mirroring of our work in both this group and in the mental health task force. As of September this year, we now have Rackham's Committee on Graduate Student Mental Health and Wellbeing that can function as a resource as we continue this work. The intersections between disability and mental health work on various levels, and we as the working group learned that they are definitely not clearly delineated. In talking about mental health and disability, we should allow for certain fuzziness. An approach centered on the individual student may be a good first step. It is important to acknowledge that some mental health conditions can be a type of non-apparent disability, and as such, accommodations must be sought to support these students. The intersection between mental health and disability is also one of the issues where a lot of education needs to happen, because not many people have a good grasp of what is at stake here. And this was true also for the members of the working group. We learned a lot in the past couple of months, and we continue to learn. A number of the presentations earlier this month were very beneficial, and I would urge every person to seek them out and learn once the recordings of those sessions are available. For example, I think that the presentation by Dr. Shana Katari earlier this month should be required watching for every person working and learning at this university. It should be part of every orientation, every onboarding process for students and employees alike. Another level on which the intersection between mental health and disability works is that it is clear, also from the needs assessment, that the processes to request accommodations, both academic and employment-based, can create significant stress and anxiety and can negatively impact graduate student mental health. Darlene just mentioned this in her part of the presentation as well. Another thing to be aware of is that certain mental health conditions make it harder to complete the accommodations process in the first place. So as we are looking at accommodations procedures and policies, we should also take into account the possible consequences for the mental health and well-being of the students who are requesting these accommodations. For the final part of this presentation, I now turn things over to Beth.
Thank you, Arthur. As my colleagues have already mentioned, the process is quite complex, and we know that it is a little messy about how we support graduate students, especially around disabilities here on our campus. From this working group, what we've been charged with, once Dean Mike Solomon accepted the report, was the implementation of recommendations. And one way to do so was to create a faculty workshop that would center on improving education and compliance, that would help disseminate best practices to create a more welcoming departmental climate for grad students with disabilities, and also partner with partner with services for students with disabilities and the ADA coordinator to create a more welcoming institutional climate for grad students with disabilities on campus. What we are hoping as a working group is that we are able to provide not only our students, but our faculty with knowledge about how we can go ahead and create a university that goes beyond compliance. The development of a faculty workshop is the most tangible example we have of how the recommendations from the report are being implemented. So as I was saying, the development of a faculty workshop is the most tangible example we have of how the recommendations from the report are being implemented. We convened a working group in spring 2021, and Rackham invited a few campus partners to take part, including myself and Christina Klein, who's here presenting with us today. The workshop is a campus-wide collaboration of multiple units, including SSD, the College of LSA, Rackham, and ECRT. As one of the largest colleges on campus with over 2,500 graduate students, LSA is so happy to be involved and be a part of this working group to establish a workshop for faculty that can help educate faculty about how they can support grad students on campus. The purpose of the faculty workshop is to distinguish between grad student academic-based and employment-based accommodations. As Darlene pointed out, it's quite a complex process as our grad students hold dual roles here on campus. We also hope with this workshop to deepen the knowledge of disabilities and disability cultures, to help faculty discover the new online academic accommodations request process through SSD, to help faculty learn the process for appealing accommodation decisions and addressing unresolved disability accommodation and access needs and grievances, to allow faculty to examine the intersections and differences between disabilities, mental health, and neurodiversity, to help faculty understand evidence-based practices for improving climate and culture for grad students with disabilities, and to allow them to explore methods to go beyond compliance, such as incorporating universal design concepts. We are currently in the process of convening focus groups with various campus staff and faculty for feedback and insight on the content of this workshop and presentation. Our overall goal is to begin with a pilot of this workshop for select individual departments and units before we open it up to all Rackham programs. Our hope is that we will be able to help faculty better navigate how to support their students on campus through universal design concepts. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ephraim and open it up for questions and answers section of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Beth, and thank you to all of my colleagues presenting today and for those of you participating in this workshop. We wanted to make sure that there was plenty of time for question and answer period. And so I've stopped sharing the screen and we'd be happy to take questions. But as we're waiting for some of the questions to come in through the chat, we do have a Q&A and chat functions. I would like to just ask some of my fellow panelists, what was the thing I think that you learned through this process about our campus, about our student body, about what needs to be done to make our academy less ableist and more anti-ableist? What did you learn through this process?
Well, there is a complete silence, but what I learned, and I think, I mean, that was also mirrored by some of the other presentations in this conference, is indeed that we really need a change of discourse, a change of thinking among all the constituents of the University of Michigan. That it will not do to just provide more accommodations or more ADA coordinators or more SSD staff, but we all need to sit and really rethink our approach, our thinking of how we do this work, and that it needs the involvement of us all, not only the people who are directly involved. I don't know whether that completely answers your question, but it was so quiet.
Great, thank you, Arthur. Other lessons learned, we're starting to get questions in the Q&A and chat functions, but I do want to give you all an opportunity to answer that question. Beth?
Hi, this is Beth speaking. I think what I was really shocked to learn throughout the whole process is just the amount of education that is needed for, I think, everyone on campus about how the processes work, not just for graduate students, but for undergraduate students, but also for faculty and staff as well, too. The fact that we are such a decentralized campus can make it very confusing, I think, for a lot of people, about who they need to turn to, what office they should ask questions to. And I think for me, working in graduate education on behalf of the college, and I have a lot of contact with our graduate coordinators and staff throughout the colleges, in addition to our faculty, is that constant question of where do I go? And what is the process? That people know a little bit of something, but they don't know everything. And that's okay, but we want to make sure they have the resources, but they also feel empowered to be able to support students and get them to the right place. And I think a workshop like this is going to help our faculty immensely feel a little bit more confident about the processes, procedures, and knowing that it's not just the bare minimum that we're asking them to do, right? We're asking them to really rethink and be innovative about how we are allies for our students.
Thank you, Beth. this ties into some of the discussion around the confusion, right, and the maybe less than efficient method that students have to struggle with as they navigate the accommodations process on our campus. Mark Clegg in the Q&A asked, can you discuss cases when the student and staff status of Rackham students creates either confusion or conflicts when meeting accommodation needs? I'd like to understand the distinctions and frictions more. And so maybe I can start with one example and ask my colleagues to add any additional comments or examples that they'd like. When conducting the study, we saw this issue arise fairly acutely. So graduate students, as they pass from being on fellowship and really focusing on their classwork and their research into other funding opportunities like GSI, being an instructor, or GSRA status, they had requested and successfully implemented accommodations, for example, in their office to accommodate whatever they needed in terms of software or maybe even physical hardware, office furniture. As their status changed from being on fellowship as a student, and then they had become a GSI, for example, they had to go through the accommodations process again, even though their disability had not changed. These are persistent disabilities, regardless of what their status is on campus. And so if they needed an adaptive desk, for example, their adaptive desk as a student is still helpful as an adaptive desk for them as an employee of the university. And removing that adaptive desk for a semester because they changed their status is not helpful to the student, right? And can be very frustrating. And then to make them go through the entire process again, to have that adaptive desk to be replaced in their office becomes a really big source, as you can imagine, of frustration and also confusion. Why do I have to do this? And also it requires additional disclosures to a whole different set of people. And so, that can be less than comfortable for our students as well. I don't know if there are any other examples that you all might have, but this was clearly one of the most important findings from the study.
Yeah, an example that I can think of is a student who is employed and they're working in the lab. So they're working in a lab setting, but the research that they're working on is related to, to their research interests and ultimately their dissertation. And so I think there's a sort of a clear sort of overlap between the employment and the academic side there. And, so how do you make accommodations for, the academic side, and then they're also an employee. So do you use SSD's accommodation process, or do you use Rackham's accommodation process? In reality, we probably work very closely together on an instance such as that, but sometimes it's just not clear.
Thank you, Darlene. Are there any other examples from the panel regarding this distinction between employment-based accommodations and student-based accommodations? I think we covered that fairly well. We do have a question from a graduate student, so I wanted to kind of privilege and send to our students. As a grad student, how can I get my department to start talking about providing accommodations as a default, as opposed to having students ask for accommodations? I think the conversation about disability in my department is severely lacking. I think, Christina, you were talking about that. So maybe I'll ask you to answer that first.
Sure. So the first thing I would mention is I think that question really underscores the need for the type of workshop that Beth was talking about in her section as well, where there needs to be first and foremost some education within departments, and then, some very specific tools and additional, specific conversations with these departments and with the units around how do we leverage that knowledge. It's great to know, it's great to understand universal design principles, it's great to understand the processes and the resources for students. Now let's be strategic about how we put that information into place so that we know we can reach graduate students. I will say, as that faculty workshop is being developed, given the nature of the institution, the current practice or strategy has been, I'm not going to surprise anyone when I say this, it's been decentralized. It really has been, for the most part, up to various folks reaching out to either myself, Darlene, or others, talking about, there's a lack of understanding, or maybe there's an opportunity to develop understanding further in this unit. What can I do? And then, I'll take it and run with that. Like, if I know which unit it is, I will reach out to unit leadership and see what can I do to go in there and maybe have a training. But again, it sort of starts with what Beth talked about. It starts with that education and discussion, opening up a discussion, and then an encouragement and a conversation around specific concrete strategies. So my hope is that as these faculty workshops go into place, first, folks will start to understand the responsibilities, again, kind of that base level. But then, because what's built into these workshops is thinking about more broadly how to create a more inclusive experience, I would imagine that part of that workshop would be in particular about how do we reach, or how do we share this information with students in a way that they know they can access it. They feel like they can access it in multiple formats in a way that's either, private or based on kind of their desire and how to navigate it, all the way to here are the phone numbers of the folks that you need. So while that's all being put in, okay, so sorry, I do talk very quickly when I get excited. So while that's being put into place, my immediate kind of interim, we can do this now strategy is reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to start having conversations with unit leadership about, an opportunity to start the conversation so that they can start the conversation as graduate students come in.
Thank you, Christina. I appreciate that. This is a very sort of concrete, practical question, but I want to make sure, Darlene, you've already talked about it a little bit. I want to make sure everyone fully understands what resources are available. So in the Q&A, there's a question, is there financial support for faculty for ADA accommodations in classrooms and or their offices? Darlene, what resources?
Well, first, may I ask a clarifying question? Are the ADA accommodations for the faculty, or the faculty are trying to provide accommodations within the classroom setting or office setting for their students?
It's not clear from the question.
So
you want to talk about the difference? Because
so I'm thinking if there are needs within the classroom, there are actually a couple of things that could happen. Again, SSD, our services for students with disability, would be a great resource for helping to identify and adding equipment, etc. I think working with the facilities person within the classroom building would be a great place to start as well, to sort of identify, certain accommodations that might be needed, whether it's equipment, whether it's furnishings, etc. And so there's usually kind of a budget attached to that could be used for those kinds of things. And then if, the accommodations are for the students, for example, in the classroom, again, that would be a services for students with disabilities issue in terms of identifying the appropriate accommodation and then acquiring that accommodation. If it's for a faculty member who actually needs an accommodation in the classroom, I'm going to defer to Christina on that, but I think it would be more of an HR, human resources related issue, and that faculty member would seek out their human resource person. So.
So yes, when it comes to an employee, including a faculty or a staff member's personal accommodations, whether it's within their classroom, in their office, or elsewhere, the funding for those accommodations shouldn't be coming from the employee. Usually that's handled on a unit by unit level, again, hearkening back to what I mentioned earlier about the decentralization. But I also want to plug another resource. If we're talking about modifying the physical space, particularly in general fund buildings. So don't worry about that right now. But particular buildings, a significant portion of the buildings at the university, if we need to make a physical modification to the building, such as installing a power door operator, a ramp, an accessible restroom, or other modification in order to allow a disabled faculty member or staff member to have access, then there is actually a centralized fund available for that. And if you need, so for the resources around that, if you have questions about that, you can always contact me directly, either around that fund I talked about a moment ago, or if you are seeking accommodations for yourself personally, you can contact me directly as well.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, Darlene. I see that we're beginning to near the end of our time, but again, I wanted to really privilege some of our graduate student questions and let you know that we're all available for questions and resources beyond this workshop as well, beyond this presentation. So please feel free to reach out to us. But one question from, it seems like maybe one of our graduate students, Sarah Lee, what advice do you have for a new graduate level fellowship open to students at University of Michigan and beyond to make sure the fellowship and application is accessible and inclusive? What can we do just to make our processes more inclusive and accessible? For me, I think, what we've learned from the needs assessment is that we just need greater visibility and education on our campus. So that's what we're beginning. We're beginning this process to create greater visibility. And I think as we move forward with our implementation, I think we'll take that lens, that beyond compliance, accessibility, and inclusion lens to all of our processes in a way that you're seeing D&I sort of permeate everything on our campus. And I think part of the intervention of this is what an important part accessibility is in this D&I conversation. And so as we take that D&I lens to all of our policies, procedures, opportunities on campus, applying that accessibility and inclusion lens to these processes as well. I don't know if there's anything to add, because this lends well into another question about where do we see this going. From Jessica McCaig, are there plans to continue assessing graduate student experiences on campus to see how the changes as U of M's approach to accommodations and accessibility changes? What are the next steps?
Well, I think Beth already outlined some of the next steps. So specifically for this workshop that we're now working on, as Beth said, so we have been working with a number of focus groups to get feedback. There will be a faculty staff focus group. There will also be a student focus group to really make sure that this workshop is in the best possible shape that it can be. And then the next step will be to, well, go out into the world, into the academic world of the University of Michigan, and share it with, well, first some select faculty groups to really make sure that the discourse is changing. And eventually, I think it will be a workshop that we can go out to individual departments and programs and really work with those programs to go beyond compliance, to get the universal design thinking that is possible for graduate programs, we all think, but to make sure that gets there as well. I think the person is absolutely right that of course there need to be further data collection about, indeed, as we have been working then for say 2-3 years, to make sure that we are doing the right thing, that there are measurable differences happening. And so again, at this moment, there are no direct plans, but yes, it will be important to make sure that as we are continuing this work, that there will be another check-in with our graduate students, a survey, to make sure that there is that change that we want to see.
Thank you, Arthur. Yes, indeed. I think the question is right on point, that we need to see if we're moving the needle at all. But I think, we have to first roll out the workshop and begin to work with faculty and leadership across campus so that we're all speaking a common language, we're all pulling in a similar direction. But certainly always listening to our students and getting a on the ground assessment of whether we're moving in the right direction. And then eventually, I think using the first needs assessment as kind of a baseline to see, have we improved, the situation for our students on campus as a result of that intervention. And so with that, I'd like to again thank my co-presenters. And if those of you who are still here would help me in doing that, thank you. It's been, a pleasure working with you on this, and I look forward to continue to work with you as we roll this out and continuing to engage in this important conversation of making this, the University of Michigan a more anti-ableist academy across campus. So thank you for all of our colleagues that participated today. I would like to remind everyone that our next session for the Anti-Ableist Academy is requesting accommodations, which dovetails well with our conversation this afternoon. Requesting accommodations, that session will be on Wednesday, October 27th. And I believe they just added the link into the chat. So if you'd like more information or would like to reserve your spot in that session, please click that link and we'd invite you to join everyone then. And so again, with that, I'd like to thank you all and look forward to continue to work with you all to make the University of Michigan a more anti-ableist academy. Thank you for your efforts and hope to see you around campus. Bye-bye.